All right. Hello, hello. Welcome to the Supported and Unstuck live Q&A call. I'm super excited to be here with all of you today. I'm just trying to arrange, oops, gotta mute myself on YouTube. There we go. All right, so I'm streaming live in several different locations here right now, so I do apologize for the weird intro. But I am super, super excited to be here today. Um, I'm trying to figure out how to, there we go. Okay. I'm trying to figure out how to set everything up for the webinar. But let me know in the chat who you are, where you're showing up from, where you're at in your astrology journey. Are you a newbie astrologer? Have you been studying for quite a while? And let me know where you're feeling a little bit stuck, because that's what we're here to do today, is to get you unstuck. And so in today's Q&A call, we're going to be going through some of the pre-submitted questions that a lot of you, oh, Jen, could you make your video go away and your audio? There we go. Sorry. So in today's Q&A call, we're going to be going through some of the pre-submitted questions for those who registered in advance. And we're also going to be answering your questions live on the call. If you're here on Zoom with us, type your questions into the Q&A box, and I will go through them as we're going through the Q&A. We're going to be going for about an hour and 45 minutes, because I promised you guys that extra 45 minutes. If you're watching on Zoom, we have Jen with us in the chat. She is my expert astrologer teaching assistant. She is absolutely brilliant, and she's going to be helping to answer some of your questions along the way too, to make sure everybody gets answered, because we have a lot to unpack today already. If you're watching on Instagram, comment Zoom in the chat, and I will send you the link to the Zoom call. I won't be answering your questions from the live chat on Instagram. So if you want your questions answered live, you have to pop on over to Zoom. Same thing if you're over on YouTube. I have a link in the description for the YouTube video for you. And we have Chelsea in the chat there on Instagram and YouTube. She's another one of our brilliant astrologers and teaching assistants. She's going to help sort things out for you if you're having any trouble at all. All right. And so basically, the way that I've done this is I've taken the pre-submissions and I've sorted them into groups based on category. So we're going to start with the more basic questions, and then work our way through the more advanced questions as we get deeper and deeper into this call. I'm going to pause in between each category and each section of those pre-submissions so I can answer your questions live. So you're going to be getting your questions answered live along the way too. You're not going to have to wait until the very end for that. I also want to mention, before we dive in, if you are somebody who's interested in learning astrology, becoming a professional astrologer even, I have my Cosmic Academy of Astrology program right now on sale. You can get each of the individual levels for 35% off, or you can bundle all 6 levels. When you do that, you always save the most, but right now you can save up to 62%, which is a lot. So we're going to go through the Academy just for like 5 or 10 minutes at the very, very end of this. In the meantime, I'm going to dive right in and start answering your questions. So yeah, I'm super excited. All right. So Leah wanted to know, what's the difference between tropical and sidereal astrology? If somebody resonates more with sidereal, how should that be explained? So, Lisa, the difference between sidereal and tropical astrology is essentially that sidereal astrology is based off of the actual like constellations in the sky. So, even though the constellations are not divided up into 30-degree exact segments in the sky, the sidereal astrology zodiac is. So there is still a human component where there's been these dividing lines put in there, but the sidereal zodiac does shift with the precession of the equinox, and it is tied to the constellations. The tropical zodiac, the Western tropical zodiac, is not tied to the constellations. Therefore, if you hear someone who says that the tropical zodiac is wrong because of the precession of the equinox, they don't understand what the tropical zodiac actually is. The tropical zodiac is based off of seasonal markers, specifically the equinoxes and the solstices, and it's divided up from there. And even the significations of each sign are tied to the energy and the experiences that we have at the beginning, middle, and end of each season in the Northern Hemisphere. So unfortunately, this tropical zodiac was developed in the Northern Hemisphere. It does still work if you're in the Southern Hemisphere. I've done hundreds, if not thousands of readings for people who are born south of the equator, and it still resonates, it still works. But that's what the tropical zodiac is. It's based on the sun's trajectory across the ecliptic through the seasonal cycles, whereas the sidereal astrology is based off of the sun's trajectory through the actual like constellations that are, you can see them in the sky. The tropical zodiac is, it's more seasonal. And so if you resonate more with sidereal, great. They're both two ways of looking at a similar thing or the same thing, really. They're two different systems for looking at our human nature, looking at our experiences. They're two different ways of getting to the same end goal. It doesn't mean that one is wrong and one is right. They're both looking at things from a different vantage point. So you can actually layer the sidereal and tropical zodiac and give a really complicated reading that way, but you can do it. And I've seen it done. So it's not one or the other, or even both. It's whatever feels best to you, works best for you in practice for yourself and with your clients. It's whatever, yeah, it's whatever works best for you personally as an astrologer. So you can play with both of those and you can figure it out. Um, and so Kay had a very similar question. So in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology, Kay, she wanted to know which system I use to teach in my courses. We teach using the Western tropical zodiac. I teach both modern and traditional Hellenistic astrology, like in combination. And both of those use the tropical Western zodiac system that's based on the equinoxes and the solstices and the seasons. So that's my answer to that. All right. So what else do we have here? So, oh, am I on YouTube here? Where am I? There we go. Okay. So Tina wants to know, can you explain squares and oppositions? Yes, Tina, I can. So this is a very good segue from this question about the different zodiacs, because with the tropical zodiac, each zodiac sign has an element, a modality, and a gender or polarity. So it's going to be either cardinal, fixed, or mutable, which has to do with the fact of either being a sign that's associated with the beginning of a certain season, that's cardinal, the middle, which is fixed, or the end or transitional period, which is mutable. It's also going to be either an earth, air, fire, or water. And it's also going to be either masculine, so all of the air and fire signs are masculine, or it's going to be feminine, which typically just means more receptive. So masculine signs are not necessarily manly or have to do with actual, gender. It has more to do with the fact that it's more externalized, it's more action oriented versus the feminine signs, which are the water and the earth signs that are more receptive in nature. And so the best way to look at squares and oppositions in any aspect, and again, we teach this in level 1 in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology because aspects are so hard for people. And this is often left out, which is a shame because it shouldn't be glossed over. It's literally the entire premise of aspects and reading aspects is any of these different aspects is going to show you how these energies either work together or don't. And so with squares, what they have in common is their modality. So squares are going to be either cardinal squares, fixed squares, or mutable squares, because planets in the squares, as long as it's an in-sign square, are going to be in the same modality as one another. The same with oppositions. And so for squares in particular, they tend to be more challenging overall than the oppositions, in my opinion. Oppositions can be malefic, especially if they have like Saturn, Mars, difficult energy involved. They can be more beneficial if they have Venus or Jupiter involved, especially, or they can be kind of neutral, like maybe a little irksome, but not overtly challenging, but what you're looking at here is how they can work together. So oppositions require balance. They're two planets that are at odds with one another because they are in signs that are of that different, like literally they're the opposite sign, right? So that sign has a lot of opposite qualities to the other sign. And so those planets have a hard time getting along, but they can find a middle ground and find a balance. The way to understand how to find that middle ground and that balance is through the modality. So cardinal, fixed, or mutable. And so with the cardinal oppositions, they're very action oriented. So you have to meld the two energies in order for them to take action together. In the fixed signs, it's about staying course, right? It's about learning how to meld these two energies together so you can have some sort of consistency. And when it's the mutable signs, it's about transition, change, and flexibility. Same thing with squares. So squares tend to be a lot more challenging for a variety of different reasons. So when you're looking at an opposition, um, those two energies, they're going to be in the same gender. So not only do they have the modality the same, but they're either going to be, you're either going to get like a fire and an earth, or you're going to get a water and, or sorry, a fire and an air, or a water and an earth. So they're going to have more in common, which makes them less problematic. The squares, they have that cardinal, fixed, or mutable. And so typically with the squares, the modality explains the nature of the square and the complications and challenges that you're going to find around that square. And this is something that I learned a long time ago that really shifted my understanding of how to work with squares. So you're either going to have that cardinal square, which is going to be a crisis of initiation, where every new beginning feels like some sort of crisis. This is sometimes a crisis of needing to tackle things head on if you are having squares that involve planets that are in the earth signs, or the water signs, right? It's going to be an energy of either sidestepping something or facing it head on. So, for example, and it's not always the water signs or the earth signs, but for example, with squares that are cardinal, so the cardinal signs are Aries, Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn. Aries and Capricorn tend to really face things head on, and they do tend to tackle things when there are challenges that come up. However, Cancer tends to sidestep things, and Libra tends to people please or try to find the balance instead of actually going in and doing something, or it weighs the options. So those are going to work a little bit differently. But essentially, the thing is having to tackle crisis head on. Every new beginning can sometimes feel like a crisis when it comes to the specific topics and themes pertaining to those planets in your birth chart. And so when it's fixed, it's going to be a crisis of stagnancy or a crisis of wanting stability and not getting it, depending on the planets that are involved. So if there's like a Uranus energy, for example, that's going to be more the fixed energy wants stability, but Uranus does not. When it's a mutable square, it's going to be a crisis of flexibility. There can often be issues that arise when you're being inflexible, or on the opposite side of the spectrum, too flexible. And you'll find that the planets that are involved in that square, that mutable square, will inform how that shows up. And so that is my answer to that, Tina. Let's see here. And make sure you guys, if you're watching on Instagram, if you want your questions answered live, comment Zoom in the chat, and you will be taken right to the Zoom call where you can ask your questions and get them answered live. If you are on YouTube, there is a link in the description. Chelsea can also post a link for you if you're having trouble, and you can ask your questions there and get them answered live. All right, so Tina says, if there's no birth time, what time should be used? So I personally, Tina, or it's Trevina, sorry. Tina was the last question. Trevina, I personally don't give readings to people who do not have birth times, because they require what's called a chart rectification, which is a very long and involved process of kind of back engineering the chart, asking a lot of specific questions and a lot of specific timing questions, and using multiple techniques in layers to come to the most likely birth time. I've done them for clients, and from time to time I will, if their birth time is narrow because it doesn't take as long, if they know they were born within like a 2 or 3 hour span because someone was there but they don't know exactly the time, I'll sometimes do it. Not my favorite thing because it's tedious. It's so tedious. So I would get a rectified birth time for them, either through your own chart rectification process and knowledge, or from a qualified astrologer who does chart rectification. If you absolutely have to do a reading for someone who does not have a birth time, then I would use what's called a sunrise chart, which is putting the sun right on the ascendant. This works because these sunrise charts or solar charts are basically a form of using derivative houses where the house system is derived from the placement of the sun, which can tell you a lot of information about solar themes. And because the sun is kind of the core of who we are, it's the soul's expression of our it's the soul's expression of what we need, want, and desire, our soul's expression of our personality in physical reality. It can tell us a lot to just look at all of the planets in the house system derived from the sun in relationship to the sun. That's what I would do. And that's what I do in my like weekly horoscopes, my twice monthly horoscopes. I use basically a solar chart. So when I say to listen for your rising sign, your sun sign, and your moon sign, it's because these solar charts actually do work and they do give you information. So even if you don't know your rising or your moon sign, that sun sign configuration is still going to be accurate, especially when it comes to physical things that are happening in your life. So that's what I would do, Trevina. And then Trevina also wants to know, when reading for clients, what techniques do you find most essential? So the techniques I find most essential are basically all of the ones that I teach in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology. So if you're interested in that, I'll talk about it at the end. But obviously, you need to have a really strong foundation in understanding how to read and integrate and synthesize the natal story and to understand the natal potential through the birth chart. I highly recommend getting very well versed in house rulerships. That's level 3 in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology, because that's where you're going to get a lot of detail and nuance. So for the natal part of it, house rulerships are absolutely key for the type of precision that I like to have, because I like to look at practical things that are happening, real events, real experiences. I like my clients to be able to use what I'm giving them in their actual physical 3D reality. It's not just about like psychological stuff, even though they can use that. It's not esoteric. It's not, this transcendent thing all the time. It's also about how you can navigate your life, because this reality is hard. So house rulerships help you get that detail and that specificity that you can't get with other types of techniques, which is why we have a whole level dedicated to it. But also for predictions, transits, solar and lunar returns, annual and monthly perfections, which can help hone in on what to focus on for solar returns, lunar returns, and transits. And then I've gotten really into secondary progressions these past couple of years, because it's just shown me that there's like these big pivotal moments. And so that's another one we teach in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology too, that I highly recommend incorporating. Really, with predictions, I like to use 2 or 3 different techniques layered, so that way you can really get a lot of precision. But also, when you just look at like just transits, something is maybe going to happen, right? Like there's something's going to happen, but like how significant is it in the big pattern of things? You see it in transits and their solar return, and the annual perfections are lighting up that transit, then this is a big deal. Layer in the fact that there's like some sort of secondary progress thing happening that also verifies the event, then you're gonna make some really crazy predictions. All right, so let's see what questions you guys have so far for more basic kind of stuff, and then we'll keep going. So Fire Moon wants to know, in our student workbook on page 132, in relation to the opposition aspect. So in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology, you get a 385-page student workbook. That's what she's referring to if you don't know what the heck she's talking about. So I wrote, with planets in opposition, you must take into account the quality of the 2 planets to determine if the opposition represents a challenge or a gift. What do you mean by that? So excellent question. What I mean by that is kind of what I already stated, but I'm going to state it again a little bit more clearly. If you have planets that are challenging on both sides of that opposition, so it's like a Saturn Mars opposition, that is always going to be a challenge. That is not going to be, I mean, it's a gift too. It's a lesson. It's a lesson, a gift in that way. But it's always going to be challenging, right? If you have a Venus Jupiter opposition, that's the exact opposite opposition. No pun intended. So that's going to be a really beautiful harmonious energy where those two planets are both beneficial and they're both more willing to compromise and harmonize and work together to help you in some way versus Mars and Saturn, which are all about saying no to things, separation, frustration, arguments, disputes, roadblocks. So that's how you know if the opposition is going to be favorable for you and helpful to you versus if it's going to be really problematic. The neutral planets are less problematic, but if they're mixed with a benefic or a malefic, it'll swing it to one side or the other. So that's what I've seen and experienced working with thousands of people and thousands of charts is the oppositions tend to be a lot easier to work with. And when you have those benefic energies in squares, it's the same thing. Like benefic squares are objectively positive, even though subjectively they might not feel so good. From the outside looking in, it's like, well, that's great. That's fine. But to you, it might be elevated expectations and getting disappointment with a Jupiter or a Venus square. So it's all on a spectrum. All squares are not inherently just bad. All oppositions are not inherently just bad. Some trines are better than others. You have to understand the nature of the planets involved and also the strength of those planets. So another thing to look at is if the planets in the opposition are benefics, but they're in bad dignity and they're just not doing well. Like you have, let's say, Jupiter in Virgo, like in its fall. It's just like I don't, or not Virgo in its fall, in Capricorn in its fall. I'm thinking Venus right now. Jupiter's in Capricorn and it's in its fall and it doesn't have support. That's going to be less beneficial in an opposition or a square than Jupiter in Cancer where it's at right now. So everything runs on a spectrum. All right. Have you guys had students who've had a really hard time understanding and becoming experts by graduation from the Cosmic Academy of Astrology? I haven't come across that actually. All of our students who have actually gone through all of the material, done the homework, especially if they interact with us and show up for the live Q&A calls, the study group sessions, they communicate to us in the student community, especially if they get their certification at the end, they do like the final exam and all of that. We haven't really had that come up. I think most students, there's been some students who have had to redo the final exam. We give them multiple tries, but it's not like they were so far off that it was like, what is going on here? It was more like, here's a couple of things you might have missed, go back, review, and then they come back and review, and then they get their certification. So yeah, I, I don't know. Jen might be able to answer that better, but I haven't seen that yet. Students who actually dedicate themselves and do all the work, they tend to do quite well. If they finish the whole course and do all the work, it is work, right? You have to set aside time. You have to be self-disciplined. You have to practice. And the students that don't practice, those are the ones that struggle because I always tell people that astrology is only 50% book learning. The rest is experiential. So you really need that direct experience with seeing how the astrology works in action in the chart in your life and in multiple people's lives in order to understand astrology truly. So that is what's going on here. So I'm going to get into some more specific chart uh, like placement questions that we have. If you're watching over on Instagram, comment Zoom to join us live to ask your questions because I can't see the chat from here. You're going to have to ask them on Zoom. And if you're watching on YouTube, I can't have that many chats up at once because I will go insane. So also there is a link in the description so you can pop into the Zoom call and ask your questions live and I will answer them. All right, so I just need a sip of something. Some interesting questions here. So Somebody wanted to know, so this is Trevina again. Have you noticed chart patterns linked with lottery wins or investments? That is an interesting question. So I have not studied lottery winners, and I, as far as I know, have not had a client who was a lottery winner. If they were, they didn't tell me about it. However, one of my teachers, Lynn Coiner, did a deep research project on lottery winners. And what she found was that all of them had very strong trans-Pluto energy on the cusp of their second house in the Placidus house system, or with their Venus, or in the second house, or with the ruler of their second house. And that energy was activated at the time of the lottery win, or she found that a lot of people, again, on the Placidus house system, which I don't use primarily as my predominant house system, she found that they would have transiting trans Pluto hitting their second house cusp or hitting their Venus, which I thought was interesting. And for those who are like, what the heck is trans Pluto? Trans Pluto is a hypothetical planet that has been calculated based on the irregularities of the orbits of the outer planets, so Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And they were able to find that there's something there with a gravitational pull. And there was an astrologer, I think back in the 70s, that started looking at it astrologically. Lynn Coiner's done a lot of work on that too. And it's essentially tied in with this, it's almost like a Virgo-like energy. It's like a perfectionistic energy, where if it's very prominent in your chart, you had one or more perfectionistic parents that kind of caused a lot of different psychological patterns to arise in your reality. It's also very tied to separation and loss. I've noticed that too. But for some reason, she found that it was tied to lottery wins. I haven't, again, looked at it, so I don't know. Investments, people who do really well with investments that I've seen have strong positive energy in the eighth house or with the ruler of the eighth house. Second house works too. Some people say, some astrologers say the second house is tied to investments. The second house is more our savings and our material actual possessions. And so if your investment is like physical gold, ouch. If your investment is like physical gold, if your investment is well, real estate's fourth house, but if it's like vehicles or like something that's an actual thing that you're investing in, that's going to be more second house. Eighth house investments are having to do with other people's businesses, other people's money, like investing in the stock market, investing in another business. And so when you have good energy like Venus, Jupiter, exalted and really positive aspects there, like those people tend to do really well financially and with their investments. Hopefully that answers your question. How are you guys doing in the chat here? Okay. Are you guys in the chat? I think people are just asking questions. All right, there's a webinar chat too if you guys want to chat with each other. Okay, so what does it mean to have the moon conjunct the north node? So Donna wants to know what it means to have the moon conjunct the north node. So this one's interesting. The north node is an energy where it involves something that we've never had to deal with in any of our previous lifetimes, previous experiences. It's something that's really new, really exciting, but also we have ambivalence toward it. We don't know how to utilize that energy properly, especially early on in life. And we're kind of learning for the first time in this lifetime. And so when you have the North Node conjunct the moon, it typically indicates, and usually the North Node, by the way, does things to like excess. It's very insatiable. It kind of moves in extremes. It's about growth. It's moving into something. And it's kind of this excessive excitement to move forward, to plunge ahead. It is the dragon's head without the tail. It's pure intellect and like action, but without any instinct. It has none of that gut instinct. It has none of that other stuff. And so with the moon conjunct the north node, that can typically indicate a difficulty or an energy surrounding the expression of one's emotions. Her example is in Aquarius, which would be a little bit different because the moon in Aquarius can be very emotionally detached and a little bit voyeuristic in the way that it approaches its emotional experience. So people with moon in Aquarius, they tend to be able to separate themselves from their emotions and kind of view what's going on emotionally as like almost a third party observer. Like, yes, oh, it's interesting that I'm feeling that way, but they're not in it. But with the moon conjunct the north node, that changes it a little bit because it's a difficulty with navigating emotion. It can be like having emotional outbursts or emotional extremes. This isn't always the case, but I've seen moon conjunct north node come up in certain charts involving mental illness when other patterns are also there. That does not mean that someone with the moon conjunct the north node automatically has a mental illness. With medical astrology, it's always a convergence of multiple patterns that are showing up all at once in different ways to tell the story of a specific diagnosis or illness. And the moon conjunct the north node is just a pattern that shows up sometimes. People with moon conjunct the north node tend to be very psychic and attuned, very empathic, but they don't really know what to do with it. And it can be to the point of excess too. Less so with Aquarius, but still a thing. Moon conjunct North Node can indicate really faded karmic circumstances that come up and change things for them throughout their life. These big pivotal moments involving their mother, their home, their family, those types of things, and a lot of really big emotional upsets that cause them to have to really feel and deal with and learn to navigate that emotional turmoil. So it's usually a lifetime of a lot of like an emotional roller coaster where you're going to have extreme highs, extreme lows, and you're learning how to navigate that. So that's what that looks like. What other questions? Let's see here. And thank you guys so much for being here. This is fun. All right. And then how do you interpret? Okay, so this is Carlene wants to know. This is a good question. How do you interpret the North Node when its sign points to one house theme? So she's saying she has Cancer on the seventh cusp, but the node itself is located in a different house, the sixth house. How should the sign and house meaning be combined for an accurate reading? Carlene, my answer to you, which you might not like, is that I use whole sign houses. I teach astrology using whole sign houses. And so I would not look at the North Node being on the seventh house cusp or being on the descendant as being in the sixth house ever. Because if the descendant is in Cancer, the entire seventh house is in Cancer in whole sign houses. And even if you were looking at this in Placidus, if the node itself was just a tiny bit in the sixth house and right on the descendant, you'd still read it as having to pertain to relationships very strongly because it's connected to the descendant. The descendant is the angle, for those who don't know, that's connected to love, relationships, marriage, partnership. And so the North Node would be impacting that. And so the North Node would indicate faded, significant events that turn your life upside down, that take you in a new direction involving relationships. Usually people with the North Node in the seventh house have more than one really big, pivotal, fated relationship. And sometimes they'll settle down and they'll have one marriage partner if other things in their chart indicate that they're going to have a lasting one-time marriage and that marriage is just very fated and synchronistic and they know. But otherwise, there are a lot of ups and downs, and you probably have to go through a few. So I talk about that in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology, but also in my relationships and synastry course quite a bit because those node energies are a big predictor of multiple marriages. Let's see. How does a planet conjunct the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, or IC affect its expression? Donna, that is a great question. So these angles, the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, and IC, are all essentially, you can think of them as being power points in the chart. These energies, these angles, they amp up the energy of any planet that touches them. They make that planet much more predominant and much more significant in a person's life. And so that planet will take on greater significance overall. It will manifest more overtly and more physically in a person's life. And it will manifest more overtly and physically in the life area connected to that angle. So the ascendant is your personality, your body, it's your life path, it's your life trajectory, it's your major life themes. It's a big part of who you are and the way other people see you. If the planet is conjunct the ascendant, that's what it affects. Descendant is relationships, one-to-one partnerships. We just talked about that. Midheaven is career, public reputation, the energy that you put out into the world for public consumption. So even if you're not somebody who's working, there's still a midheaven energy. It's your legacy too that you leave behind. The IC is more behind the scenes. It's your family, your roots. It's kind of this core energy. So that's that. So let's see if we have any additional questions here in the little chat here. Oh, we don't have the chat enabled. How do I just toggle it on in settings? Oh no. Sorry guys, I didn't have the chat going. Let's get the chat going. That's important. I swear I had the chat. I'm going to take like 1 minute to figure this out. And if I can't figure it out, then there's just not a chat. That's really weird. Oh, okay, good. This is going on YouTube. It's like I didn't record this, but it's on YouTube. It will be recorded. Weird. I don't know how to get the chat to go on. I thought I had a chat in here. Team chat? Okay, I guess I don't know how to make the chat on, so sorry about that, you guys. But I'm gonna keep going and answer your questions. Jen, if you know how to make the chat work, tell me in Slack and I'll come back and do that. So could you tell me about, so let's see if we have any ones about the angles, because that's what we were just doing. Okay, so this is a good question involving like the nodes and the angles. So Eclipse IT wants to know, there is no planet associated with the North Node. What type of planetary energy does the North Node have? Example, Sun, Moon, Mercury, etc. So the North Node is its own situation. It has no planetary energy. So you're right, there's no planet associated with it. So it doesn't have a planetary energy. The North Node has an eclipse energy because as your eclipse IT, you should know this. It has an eclipse energy because it's essentially an astronomical calculation that's utilized to predict the timing of eclipses. And so it's very tied in with eclipse themes. Fate, destiny, karma, big transitions and pivotal moments, big upheavals, big ups and downs. The North Node is, like I mentioned before, the path that we move into in this lifetime. It's kind of like this area where we're like a baby toddler and we're really excited about all these new things that are connected to that North Node area of our life, but we don't know what to do with it yet. And so it's kind of like a toddler learning to walk for the first time or trying to run, and they might get a little bit overexcited, go too fast, and like fall on their face. And then they have to kind of take a step back, regroup, figure it out, and do it again. And so that's the energy of the North Node. It's not connected to any planet, so it doesn't have a planetary energy. Okay, what else? Are the nodes and angles at 0 or 29 degrees as important as the planets at these same degrees? Wait. Are the nodes and angles at 0 or 29 degrees as important as the planets at these same degrees? And if so, do we interpret based on that same concept? Yes, absolutely. So I have a video about this on YouTube about beginning and ending planets, and we have like modules on that in level 1 in the Academy. I don't know if you're a student or not, but beginning degree planets are an initiatory energy, and they're very highly concentrated with the energy of the sign that that planet is in. And so, for example, 0 to 5 degrees really is going to be a super hyper focused Aries energy. If you have a planet at 0 to 5 degrees Aries, it's going to be an ultra Taurus energy. If you have 0 to 5 degrees Taurus, it'll be super Gemini if it's 0 to 5 degrees Gemini. And so that's the same with the angles. That's the same with the north and south node, except the south node and north node are going to be a little bit different because they ingress at the 29th degree. And then they move backwards always in retrograde, and then they end at the 0 degree. And so it kind of flips the interpretation a little bit, but it is still a transitionary energy. I have noticed people who have their nodes at the 29th degree, it is that volatile, kind of like nebulous, almost like supernova about to burst energy that I describe for the 29th degree in a lot of my content and videos, where you're kind of moving into one thing and into another. It still transits that degree, even though it's going backwards, and it still seems to have that almost combustible, like wavering energy. It could be because it's moving into a new sign, but typically when a planet moves into a new sign, it's like ready to go. It's like all in. You're going to get hyper concentrated energy of that sign. Also, beginning planets are typically considered to be things that are premature or new. It can indicate that you are kind of new at an experience in this lifetime and you're a little naive in that area. Same thing with the angles. So if you have a planet at, or if you have your descendant at like 0 degrees, that could indicate like a little bit of being naive when it comes to relationships, or you're experiencing relationships in a new way in this lifetime. So yes, absolutely. You interpret them in a very similar way. Jen has just told me how to make the chat happen. So I am going to make the chat happen real quick. So I go into advanced settings. That's not even anything on here. Settings, meeting. Mm, yeah, I don't know where that is. Okay, we don't have a chat. I don't know why there's no chat. That's so annoying. Sorry, you guys. It should just have a chat on Zoom, right? Like I've never had to make it have a chat, and I don't see any settings. Okay, that's weird. So anyway, there's no chat in the in the Zoom. You can just ask your questions, I guess. Sorry. I know it's fun to like ask your questions and like chat with each other at the same time. All right, let's see. What else? Oh, webinars. Okay. Zoom webinar settings allow attendees to chat with everyone. I'm going to make it happen real quick. Thank you, Chelsea. By default, attendees. Oh, okay. Oh, I can't edit it because it's in progress. Sorry, you guys. I don't know why that is the default. That's dumb. Let's get back to your questions. I'm going to stop trying to play with Zoom. All right. So, um, let's get into some questions about like planetary placements and things like that. Type them into the Q&A in Zoom if you're on Zoom. If you're watching on Instagram, type Zoom in the chat and we will send you the link so you can ask your questions in real time. If you're on YouTube, hit the button to go to the Zoom meeting so that way you can ask your questions in real time. All right, so someone has Chiron retrograde in Gemini and they want to know about having a retrograde Chiron. They said they haven't been able to find a lot about retrograde Chiron in particular. I'm sorry, I'm not going to have a lot to tell you either. I haven't really found much of a difference between having Chiron in retrograde or Chiron in direct motion in your chart. I will say that with planets that are retrograde, and this is planets only typically, it doesn't really, it's not always the same for asteroids and things like that. If you have Chiron in retrograde, which I really haven't seen a ton of that, it's retrograde right now. All planets, when they're in retrograde, they tend to be more introspective, they tend to be more subjective and internalized. And so the wound would probably be more internalized as opposed to something external that happened to you. It could be something more innate, or it could be something, again, that's just more psychological, more emotional, more embedded. Also, those planets tend to express themselves in a way that's more rebellious. Chiron is the wounded healer. It is that healer, heal thyself energy. And so if you show up to lead or to heal others, if you have a prominent Chiron placement, it could indicate that you're doing so in a way that's off the beaten path or a little rebellious or outside of the norm. That's what I would say for the Chiron retrograde. But I haven't really seen a ton of difference between how Chiron is expressed in someone's chart when it's retrograde versus direct. So I don't know if that's really applicable. It's definitely applicable for planets, but Chiron's not a planet, and these asteroids just don't do planet things. So hopefully that helps a little bit. All right, what else? So what does Venus square Saturn mean in a natal chart? Does the interpretation change by sign or house? That's what Daria wants to know. Um, Venus square Saturn could mean a lot of different things because you're right, Daria. The interpretation changes by sign and by house. If Saturn is the stronger, more dominant influence, it's going to be overpowering Venus. If Venus is the stronger, more dominant influence, it's going to be overpowering Saturn. If you were born during the daytime, Saturn's not as malefic. If Saturn's at its home sign, it's going to be usually more helpful. If you're born during the daytime, Venus is less benefic. So this is not as prominent of an energy. If Venus is at its fall, it's not going to be as strong or as easily able to generate benefits. If Saturn's at its fall, it's usually more challenging to deal with, actually. So that's always kind of interesting. This could be anything from money problems if Venus is the ruler of your second house, or if it's in your second house, or if Saturn's in your second house, to like money blockages. It could be relationship issues if it's in your seventh house, if it's with the ruler of the seventh house, or even just in general, because Venus has to do with material possessions and relationships. It could be blockages, lessons, hurdles, things taking longer when it comes to those types of themes. But if it's connected to, like, let's say Venus rules your career, it's your 10th house is occupied by Libra and you have Venus square Saturn, it can indicate that your career takes a longer time to take off. That could be an area of like lesson for you. That could be an area where you're always comparing yourself to where other people are at your stage in life and feeling like you're behind, because for you it's more of a struggle. You're always coming across roadblocks or blockages. It's taking much longer. So again, it really depends though on how it's showing up in your chart. These things, these general astrology interpretations, you guys, that you see like on the internet that you get from ChatGPT, which those are always so wrong. Like some of them are okay, but like don't use AI as an astrologer. It doesn't know what it's doing, at least not yet. They're not applicable to everyone because everything in your chart is very nuanced. It always runs in a spectrum, and you really won't get the whole picture unless you're taking into account everything. So that's what I'll say about that. Obviously, we teach you how to do that in the academy. If someone has a Mars, Saturn, Pluto stellium, so if someone has a Mars, Saturn, Pluto stellium, Annabelle wants to know, how do Saturn's lessons integrate with Pluto and Mars? What mastery is required in this lifetime? That is an intense one. And I have only seen people with this configuration have a lot of problems. So this can show up in a lot of different ways. It depends on where it is in your chart, Annabelle, or in the other person's chart. It depends on the house. It depends on the sign placement, like I mentioned before. But this typically is a lot of wanting to like push things and get your own way, but coming up against those Saturnian blockages and roadblocks where it's like your responsibility is getting in the way, someone else is getting in the way. I've also seen this with people who are sometimes quite manipulative, depending on the placement. So again, that's not everyone. If it's tied to like your sun, if it's tied to your ascendant, if it's doing something else, it could also be that you tend to come up against people who are very psychologically and emotionally intense and manipulative or pushy. I've seen this associated with psychological and physical abuse in certain cases, in certain placements. So it really just depends. It really just depends. The mastery that's required in this lifetime is patience. It's self-discipline, it's staying the course. it's not trying to push too hard and go all in, but not holding back too much or letting other people or outside situations get in the way. That's that Saturn. But Mars and Pluto is very intense in its ability to manifest and make something happen. It gets obsessed with something and it just follows that thread. But Saturn stops it. It creates procrastination that could be internal. It creates issues that kind of stall you out and prevent you from following those threads. It's a lot of frustration. It's a life that is met with a lot of frustration where it feels like you want something to happen and it's not always going to be there. So the mastery is learning to be okay with everything not panning out the way that you want it to, but also finding that balance and not and learning to channel that frustration of in a different way, or like learning to not get frustrated when these roadblocks come up, because for you these things are going to take a little bit longer. Also, learning how to channel your anger. Mars Pluto people and Mars Saturn people tend to bottle up their emotions. They tend to brood. They tend to isolate themselves when they are angry instead of expressing it in some sort of healthy way. And I've seen this turn into like physical problems. So that's another thing. So learning appropriately how to channel your anger without overdoing it, which you wouldn't with Saturn. That Mars Pluto can, but it's like this broody energy. Hopefully that helps. Okay, what else? Um, okay, so India wants me to explain a square. I just did at the beginning. I'm so sorry, India. I'm not going to explain it again, but watch the replay of this, and you'll get the explanation of a square. Okay, let's see. Vicky wants to know, how does having a yod with Venus at the focal point, Saturn and Jupiter quincunx Venus affect me? Could this explain why I feel like I know a lot but nothing at all, despite studying astrology so much? Vicky, I don't know if that explains why you feel like you know a lot but nothing at all. I'd have to see your entire birth chart to really answer that question. So I'm sorry, but I don't know. Saturn and Jupiter in an in conjunction, maybe, because Jupiter in an in conjunction is this insatiable need to acquire more and more knowledge to prove yourself, right? Like that's a big part of that Jupiter, to prove yourself in some way, to prove yourself not necessarily worthy, but like, yeah, kind of worthy of the hype. Like you feel like you're overestimated, or that there's something that's lacking there. So there is this acquiring, or this really intense desire to acquire a lot of knowledge that will come with a Jupiter in conjunction, regardless of what planet it's connected to, where they're usually lifelong students, but they don't have the experience to back it up. Later on, when you figure that out, you can unlock that, and your greatest talent will be your wisdom and your experience. So it could be that you have a lot of book learning, but you don't have a lot of experience. And with astrology, maybe you're listening to a lot of videos, you're learning all over the internet, but you're not synergizing it and you're not practicing. Like practice. Jupiter in conjunction people, they don't go out and do the things to actually get the real world experience. Again, later on they do. The Venus at the apex of the quincunx is a big latent talent, but it's also a big psychological blockage that you have to work through to get to that latent talent. I talked all about this in my recent video on in conjunctions last Saturday, but essentially Venus people have this innate feeling of being unlovable or unworthy of unconditional love. They feel that love only comes to them conditionally due to early childhood experiences. And so they have to learn to give up people pleasing. They have to learn to, accept themselves. They have to learn that love does not have to be conditional. And then you'll unlock better self-worth, better relationships, but also these latent Venus talents, which could have anything to, it depends on where this is in your chart. I mean, it could have to do with like career talents involving Venusian types of things like art, or it could have to do with like finances. It could have to do with certain types of relationships. It really just depends on how that's showing up in your birth chart. All right. Melinda wants to know, how should I interpret the lot of fortune in Pisces in the 11th house, especially since Pisces straddles the 11th and 12th? Could it show a karmic theme? So again, I do not use quadrant house systems anymore, except for specific things. So I'll use Placidus for relocation because it's very locational in nature. I'll sometimes look at Placidus cusps if I'm trying to figure out something and it isn't explained otherwise for like a transit. Other than that, I don't touch Placidus. I use Regiomontanus for horary because that's the horary house system. But for everything else, I do not look at that. So I can't tell you about a planet straddling two houses. It's either in the 11th house or it's in the 12th house. I don't know which one it actually is for you, Melinda, because I can't see your chart. But the lot of fortune in Pisces, the lot of fortune is always something that's fated, that's karmic. I talk about this in my lot of fortune and spirit workshop that you guys can find later if you want. It's always this area of life where our fortune, where luck, where opportunity, or where fate steps in and kind of does things for us. So it's always somewhat karmic. I wouldn't say it's not karmic in the way that the North nodes are, but it's always something that is beyond us is kind of helping us or delivering something to us. The lot of fortune is also very tied to obviously like wealth and material possessions. It's also that luck, and it's also tied to bodily health because it's the lot that's associated with the moon. In the hermetic lots, it's the lot of the moon. So that's what the lot of fortune is. Um, is the speed so Eclipse IT wants to know, is the speed of the planet at the time of birth important? And if so, how do you find out the speed of the planet? Is it a stationary planet in the birth chart? Is a stationary planet in the birth chart a powerful planet? So you find out the speed of the planet by looking at your software. It'll show you how to do that. I don't have time to do a tutorial for all of that, but you can Google it. It'll show you how to do it on whatever software that you are using, because I don't know which one that you use. But a stationary planet is going to be a very predominant, really powerful energy. So yes, it is going to be, so it's not moving. It's just, it's very close to the earth. It's very strong in its power, but there's this significance of things not moving forward. It also depends on whether it's stationing direct or stationing retrograde, because stationing retrograde is going to be that more internalized energy. It's going to be having to repeat things. It's going to be more rebellious, where if it's stationing direct, it's ready to move forward with something. And with your secondary progressions, the year of your life and how fast it starts to go in progressions and whether it's moving forward or backward is going to tell you a lot about your experience moving forward from birth onward. So it does matter. It is important, and hopefully that answers your question. All right, let's see. Um, what does it mean to have half your planets retrograde, and is it common to have 4 T-squares? Um, yeah, I mean, if you have a splash chart or a splay chart, so if you look at the Jones charts types, anyone who's watching this, it'll show you that there's different like common patterns in the chart. And like the splash at the splay, they tend to have planets all over the place. And so they tend to have a lot of T-squares and crosses and trines and all sorts of things. And so it's common in those charts to have, multiple T-squares. Not that crazy. It does indicate there's a lot of areas of challenge, obviously, that you're going to have to work through, but not abnormal in any way. Having half your planets retrograde, also not abnormal. Like all of the outer planets are retrograde half the year. I'm venturing to guess that most of these planets are outer planets. Not that significant, not that crazy. But any planets that are retrograde, again, are going to be more internalized, more rebellious. It does in your birth chart indicate having to kind of go back and redo things at different points in life in that area that's being impacted by the retrograde planet. And so I have a whole video on retrograde planets. We also teach about this very in depth in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology. Check out my video on YouTube or enroll if you want to get really deep into each of those planets. All right. So let's check on you guys here. I don't even know what that question means. Helena, I don't know what you mean by a feral planet. Can you elaborate on that? I've never heard of that. Ashley wants to know about planets that are out of bounds, what that means. So when a planet is out of bounds, it essentially means that it's kind of past the point that it normally goes, like off the ecliptic. It's kind of almost like having a retrograde planet. It operates in a way that's outside of the norm, right? Think about these boundaries that these planets normally stay within. When it's out of bounds, it means that it's gone past those boundaries. And so it's kind of an energy that's very symbolic or connected to what it actually does. So it's a planet where the planet's significations tend to push boundaries. They tend to be outside of the norm. I only really look at this when it comes to medical astrology, especially because like out of bounds moon tends to show up a lot with like mental health issues and things like that. Sometimes physical health issues because the moon is the traditional significator of the physical body. Some other planets out of bounds can show certain things. It's not something I pay a ton of attention to, but it does. I mean, it gives you a little extra layer of nuance in your interpretation if you really want to go wild with it. Okay. Let's see what else we have going on here. We have a lot of questions in here. And if you're in the Zoom room, if you're in the Zoom room, if you're in the Zoom room, it's a tongue twister, asking your questions. Jen is also in here, just so you know, answering some of the questions, typing them. So if I don't get to them, then she's going to be helping answer all of those questions. We're also going to download the rest of the questions so I can answer them and send them out with the replay. So hopefully we'll get all that done tonight. We'll see. You guys have a lot of questions. So all of them will get answered at some point, I think. But yeah, Jen's answering some of them, all the ones that she knows how to answer and that she can answer quickly in a written format. So all of you are going to get taken care of here. If you're watching on Instagram, make sure you comment Zoom so you can join us live in the Zoom call so you can ask your questions live. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you click that link to head on over to the Zoom call to ask your questions live. Okay, so let's keep going here. Or should we take like a 5-minute break? It's been an hour. Let's take 5 minutes because this is live, or maybe 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, and I will see you back here in just a second. All right, guys, thank you for giving me a quick minute here to take a break. I wish I had a chat. There's a chat on YouTube at least. But yeah, I'm sorry about the chat being missing. So let's get into some additional questions here. So Kimberly wants to know which natal planets or transits are most linked to depression and anxiety, and how can astrology support mental health during those times? So that's the key to your question, Kimberly, is the natal placements, right? So in medical astrology, nothing, and in astrology in general, nothing can happen that's not already in your chart as a potential. So we call that sometimes the natal potential. If you have multiple different patterns that converge that are connected to depression or anxiety in your birth chart, and then they're activated by like the perfect storm of transits, then you might have that manifest. If you don't have depression or anxiety embedded in your birth chart as a potential, then you might have fleeting, changes of mood. You might have depressed periods where you're not actually having clinical depression, but you're feeling down. Like everybody has that. You might feel anxious in terms of like an actual situation where it's appropriate to the situation, but it's not an anxiety disorder. So you're never going to have these things show up unless it shows up as a natal potential. And it's never just one placement or pattern. It's always multiple patterns that are in the birth chart. And so, and really anything, a lot of different transits can activate it. So it's not about the transit. Long-term transits, short-term transits, going over these points can activate it. But for anxiety, I have a whole video about anxiety markers in the birth chart. The more common ones that I see are the sun conjunct Mercury, so a combust Mercury. That tends to be a lot of playing, replaying, ruminating situations in your head, a lot of Mars conjunctions to the sun also. A lot of Mars Mercury energies make you very anxious. A lot of Uranus configurations with Mars, with Mercury, with the sun. I've also seen a lot of 12th house energy with certain types of anxiety, especially like social anxiety. So there's a lot, but you have to have not just one of these placements. You usually have to have many of them. That's not the entire list. Neptune in the 12th house or Neptune placements with your sun or your moon can make you very sensitive, which can make you more prone to anxiety. So again, you have to have more than one of these. I have a more complete list on YouTube and in my medical astrology mastery course. That's actually one of the research projects that I kind of share with you guys and that we work through together in that course. And depression's in there too. We talk about that pretty in depth. But depression, there's usually a lot of sun stuff going on. So actual clinical depression, you'll see Pluto either conjunct, opposition, square the sun. Also Pluto and eighth house placements and Pluto placements, like really strong Pluto placements with certain planets can indicate like PTSD and things like that. So that's another anxiety disorder. Pluto with the sun, Saturn on the ascendant, Saturn with Mercury. Those things can indicate more like a depressed state, or more being more prone to being pessimistic or being more prone to depression. Those aren't the only configurations. There's a whole laundry list, but those are the top like 3 or 4 that I see most commonly. But again, you have to have all those patterns, and the depression or the anxiety will show up or become more predominant, especially when there's a long-term transit that is hitting one or more of the more prominent planets in the pattern or patterns that are connected to those mental health issues. So we teach how to kind of synergize all of that in medical astrology mastery. It's a little bit of a complex question, but hopefully I helped with that. Let's see. Can narcissistic traits be seen in a natal chart? Kathy wants to know, if so, where would I look in natal, medical, or compatibility charts? So you definitely wouldn't look in compatibility charts for narcissism. And so when people say narcissistic traits or narcissism, typically they're talking about like trendy buzzwords and internet stuff that's talking about narcissism, which has nothing to do with actual diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, which is an actual mental health issue. It is a very rare personality disorder that I have literally never come across a single client who's been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. I don't have a lot of example charts that I can find on that. So I personally have not been able to go in and do the research. With medical astrology, what I always do is I find as many charts as possible that have the same illness, and I look for patterns. That's how you find what's connected to what in medical astrology. It's a whole thing. Again, we teach you how to do that in medical astrology mastery, but narcissistic personality disorder is so unusual and not common as a diagnosis, and I haven't seen it in a chart, so I really couldn't tell you. So yeah, that's my answer to that one. So we have a couple like relationship questions here. So let's get into those. I think that's interesting. And we're going to get into your slow return questions and all of that in just a second. We're going to start getting into predictive astrology. But so Celie wants to know what in a chart indicates reuniting or getting back together with someone. So there's not really something in your chart that's going to indicate that. It's more going to be like the perfect storm of transits. Um, it'll happen a lot with like Venus retrogrades or, just retrograde planets in your seventh house or with your seventh house ruler. Um, especially if you have a Venus retrograde that's hitting your seventh house or your seventh house ruler, that could indicate reuniting with someone. That doesn't mean you're going to stay together. But retrogrades typically can indicate reuniting. And that's going to be the most common thing that you'll see. Like, especially if you had a planet that was going direct that hit, let's say, your descendant exact at the time of the breakup. Let's say you're having a Saturn transit to your seventh house, and at the time of the breakup, Saturn hit your descendant exact within a week. Then it goes forward. And then a couple months later, it comes retrograde and hits your descendant again. That person might come back into your life. Are they there for good? Probably not, because it moves back forward. And then, that type of thing. So a lot of times when you see someone getting back together in the chart, it's not permanent. It's not to say that you can't have a more permanent reunion. If you see like if you have like a cycle that's going on and you've reached another point in that cycle, like let's say, for the sake of keeping that Saturn energy, although that's going to take a while, right? But let's say you had the Saturn conjunction to your descendant, and what, like 4 or 5 years later, three to 5 years later, something like that, you hit your sextile, where Saturn is now sextiling your descendant. Because that's the next phase of that cycle and it's a positive aspect, you might have that person come back into your life more permanently. So it's about looking at planetary cycles, but also sometimes retrogrades will bring people back. Hopefully that helps. Okay. Jen wants to know, oops, let's see. Who, okay, what were your biggest influences as far as other astrologers, your favorite books to refer to with the most knowledgeable info, along with your astrological journey? Um, so let's see. What are my biggest influences? So I first learned astrology more seriously through Robert Phoenix, who is a teacher of mine. He's very controversial. You might hate him, don't care. He was a good astrologer. He's a great teacher. Also nice guy. Like I became friends with him. He was my mentor for a while. Um, I've also learned a lot from some of Chris Brennan's stuff. Demetra George's Hellenistic astrology books are amazing. I definitely refer to those quite a lot. Lynn Coiner is my medical astrology teacher, but I've learned a lot about just general astrology. She's a very good researcher. So she comes up with things and finds things through her astrological research that nobody else has. And she has a precision as a Virgo that I really appreciate. Who else did I learn from? I mean, I'm learning horary right now from Adam Ellenboss. That's going all right so far. The first book that I got was the only astrology book you'll ever need. That's what I started with. I still recommend that to beginners because it is a really good beginner's book. Um, Yeah, those are probably my top ones that I can think of off the top of my head. So let's see. What else do you guys have questions about? Okay, we did that. Okay. Jen, keep highlighting the good ones for me. I'm gonna move on to timing. So, or actually, no, we still have a couple relationship questions. Sorry, I forgot those. So Donna wants to know, what is the significance of a couple having reverse sun moon placements? Example, one person has sun in Pisces, moon in Aquarius, the other sun in Aquarius and moon in Pisces. In synastry, Donna, that is excellent. It indicates that you have a mutual understanding of one another, but you don't butt heads. So having one of your big three where it's like one person has the opposite of you and vice versa, that's considered to be really positive in synastry overall, not just in a relationship as a couple, but in general. Like that's considered to be a positive thing in synastry. So it typically just indicates that you have a mutual understanding, but you're not so similar that it's too much or you're going to butt heads. So you get each other. Does natal Venus square Pluto always indicate breakups or relationship struggles, especially with additional aspects like Chiron in the seventh or other squares? No, Venus square Pluto, Sammy, does not always indicate breakups or relationship struggles unless Venus is the ruler of your seventh house or located near seventh house. Venus is tied to other things in your chart, you guys. This is why house rulerships is so important. And this is why I dedicate an entire level 3 in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology, which is on sale for 35% off right now, to house rulerships. So if that is something that you're interested in, definitely check that out. But it's nuanced. So what is Venus doing? Where is it in your chart? What does it rule? What house is it in? What sign is it in? What condition is it in? And is it even tied to relationships predominantly? Venus always has to do with the way that you interrelate with people to a certain extent, but it's not always going to be, yeah, Venus is square Pluto, so you're going to have terrible relationships. Maybe you have other things in your chart that indicate otherwise. And so there is a little bit of obsessiveness, jealousy that can show up on both ends of relationships. Things like that, where there could be some psychological and emotional intensity that shows up in negative ways in relationships, but it's not the be all end all. Like your whole chart tells the story, all the patterns tell the story. All right. So let's see what else. Amanda wants to know, when interpreting current events, should I use my natal chart, progress chart, or both? So if you're asking about transits, Amanda, you always look at your natal chart with the transits. Transits to your progress chart alone don't have a lot of meaning. If you want to, you can look at your natal chart, layer in like a tri-wheel, the transits and the progress chart, because that actually does show something a little bit more significant. So if you have something that's being activated in your natal chart by the planets in progression, and then it's also being amplified by a transit that's hitting that same point in your natal chart, that same planet in your natal chart, then that's going to be way more significant than just the transits or just the progressions activating that area of your chart alone. But otherwise, if you're just listening to like a transit forecast, it's not applicable to your progress chart. And I always look at the progress chart almost entirely in the way that it activates the natal chart, because that seems to be by far the most accurate way to look at it and the most useful with actual real life experiences. That's, I think, why some people or some astrologers say that the progress chart is like more internal and it's like your psychological development. It's because if you're not looking at it in respect to the natal chart, you're not seeing the actual real world events that are happening in a person's life as accurately. And so anyway, that's how I'm teaching it in my secondary progressions course that's going to be released in the fall. If you're in the academy, by the way, you're getting that course already if you're in the upgraded academy. So don't worry about that. And if you're enrolling now, you're going to get the secondary progressions course at the discounted rate. So as I mentioned at the start of this video, Cosmic Academy of Astrology open for enrollment tomorrow at midnight is when the sale ends. You can get 35% off any individual level in the academy, or you can bundle all of the levels. You always save when you do that, but right now you can save up to 62%, which is a large chunk of change. So we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. Barbara wants to know, for annual perfections, when do themes of the next year begin? For example, if someone turns 46 in February, do the themes shift on their birthday or overlap earlier? So that's an easy one. So for solar returns, for annual perfections, both of them, the next year begins when the next year begins. With solar returns, you can see if something happens right before your birthday, you can sometimes see that showing up in your solar return because it's still impacting you after your solar year starts. But with annual perfections, it's typically very straightforward. Like, you're not going to see an overlap. The themes that are activated based on the house that's activated and based on the planetary ruler of the year, those start to occur on your birthday, like at your solar return. That's it. How do we read long-term transits? Should interpretations be based on natal planet positions compared to real-time planetary positions? Yes, that's how you read them. You answered your own questions, Zarpo. So the way that you read transits is you look at the birth chart and you see what these long-term transits, these outer planet transits are hitting in the birth chart. That's how you read them. Super easy. She also wants to know, what does it mean if a transiting planet returns to its natal position? That is called a planetary return. So similar to a solar return, which happens every single year on your birthday, most of you probably know about this, where the sun returns to its natal position, and it's the significant new beginning, this significant marker of this like time where things are going to shift and be different for you. Same thing with all of the planets in your birth chart. You have a Mercury return, you have a Venus return. I just had mine last Sunday. You have a Mars return. You have all of these returns, Jupiter return. And so each time you have a planetary return, it indicates a reset or a beginning of a new cycle for you in relationship to the significations of that planet, not just generally, but the way that it shows up in your birth chart. And so, for example, for me, I have Venus is in my ninth house in my birth chart. It's also conjunct my moon, and it's the ruler of my seventh house. And so having my Venus return doesn't just have to do with like relationship stuff or, things that are pleasurable and joyful and money and all of that. For me specifically, it could have to do with travel. It could have to do with my courses that I teach. It could have to do with my relationship with my husband. It's like a reset of those energies where there's new beginnings. And the way that you determine the most significant energy of that return is by looking at the planetary return chart, which you can pull up with most astrology softwares. And you can read it in a similar way to the solar return chart, except the planet that's returning is going to be the focal point. And those themes that are connected to your birth chart are going to be the focal point. And yeah, so that's its own situation for sure. Let's see, what else do we have? Going back to relationships and love, how do we interpret the eighth house in regards to love and relationships? It's your partner's money. The second from the seventh in derivative houses. So it's your partner's income. It's, do they make good money? Do they not make good money? What does that look like? Like, that's going to be the most significant in love and relationships, unless you have the ruler of your seventh house in the eighth, or you have Venus in the eighth, or something else that's tied to relationships in the eighth, or the ruler of the eighth in the seventh. It's not super relevant. It's relevant in terms of being your partner's income, though. Okay, let's see. We have a lot of good answered questions here. Okay, people are just like commenting and chatting in the Q&A. That's my own fault. Jen, can you mark the ones in the main chat that I already answered to, please? And just keep putting them in the Slack channel. All right, so let's keep going here. We got a lot to still get through. All right. Margaret wants to know, when interpreting transits, do we consider the house rulership of the natal planet being aspected, the rulership of the transiting planet, or both? I think you're meaning, do you consider the house that the planet rules, correct? If you're, I guess you're not in the chat, but if that is what you mean, then yes. If you mean the house rulership of the planet, meaning like the dispositor of the planet, then not really. You can, but it's not a big consideration. But yes, you would look at, so if Mars, let's say, rules your first house and your, what would it rule that, like your ninth house? No. If Mars rules your first house and your sixth house, like you're a Scorpio rising, you would look at that planet being aspected as pertaining to changes and different things going on involving your health, especially because that's the body, the first house, that's your health and illness in the sixth house. You would also look at the rulership of the transiting planet. So, for example, when Mars, for me, that's my chart. Like literally, I have a Scorpio rising. Mars is my chart ruler, but it's also my sixth house ruler. Mars transits cause all sorts of ruckus involving my health, involving my pets, involving my work. So yes, you would look at both. And this applies to all planets inner and outer. That's correct. Um, so we did that one. What else do you guys have? So Eclipse wants to know, how important is the solar return chart for the year ahead? Example, if there's a kite formation in the solar return chart, how important is the year ahead? So the kite formation in the solar return chart doesn't necessarily make the year ahead more important or special in some way. It's just a thing that you need to interpret in order to understand the big topics and themes to read the story of the year. So the solar return chart is important because you can take that chart and see a bird's eye snapshot overview of the biggest themes, the biggest energies, the biggest stories that are going to be playing out in your next year. So when you look back on that year, the bigger moments and the overall themes, that's what you're going to see in the solar return chart. And you can read it essentially like a story. And so the kite formation that you have in your solar return chart would be a part of that story. It doesn't necessarily make that birthday or that year more significant or less significant. It's just a part of how you would read that story. The things that make a solar return more significant are if it's a new moon or a full moon. New moons are always a big reset year where a lot is seeded. It doesn't mean a lot of things happen or really take off that year, but it's like things are starting and moving in a certain direction where you look back on that year and you're like, that's where it all began. If it's a full moon, it's a big action year. A lot is coming to culmination. If it's an eclipse year, your whole life is about to unravel and change. I'm actually having an eclipse solar return this year, which I've had positive experiences with pretty much every eclipse. So knock on wood, not worried about that. But those are going to be the more important ones for sure, because they involve the cycles between the sun and moon. The sun is the most important energy in your solar return chart. All right. Let's see. We have just a couple more here. I think we're going to make it. Glad I added the extra 15 minutes. If you're watching on Instagram and you want to ask your questions live before we sign off soon, make sure you comment Zoom in the chat. Head on over to the Zoom room. If you are on YouTube, same thing. If you want to get your questions in before we sign off here in about 20 minutes, or hit the link and come to the Zoom room. All right. And if you're watching this later on, Zoom room's closed. But I'm happy to ask or to answer your questions if you join us in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology, because you'll have ongoing support from me, from Jen, who's in our chat in the Zoom room, and from all of our teaching assistants, where all of your questions will always be answered. So, all right, let's get into the last couple questions here. So, in astrocartography, actually, we have one about yods here. That's like a personal chart reading question, so I'm going to skip that one for right now and keep it kind of relevant to everyone. So in astrocartography, is it problematic to relocate to a planetary line if that planet line rules your 12th house? For example, since my moon rules my 12th house with south node there, would moving to a moon MC line create 12th house type difficulties? That's what Tracy Stevens wants to know. Not necessarily, no. So I'm not sure who told you that or where you learned that information, but I feel like that person has a lack of understanding of how astrocartography works. Because if you're moving to your moon midheaven line and you don't already live on your moon midheaven line, obviously, if the moon is, well, two different things here. If you move to your moon midheaven line and your moon still rules the 12th house in your relocated chart, then yes, you would still have 12th house type difficulties. But the moon midheaven line is showing you where the moon is placed in your relocated chart. And so chances are moving in a place that shifts that big and changes the house system in your relocated chart is going to change the ruler of your 12th house in the relocated chart. Therefore, the moon is no longer going to be this 12th house energy in the relocated chart, which is what we're looking at here. So, yes, there's always a connection slightly to the 12th house. Does that mean you should never move to your moon line if the moon in your birth chart rules your 12th house? No, because it's shifting the energy. If you have problems because the moon rules your 12th house and then the moon is doing something really weird in your natal chart, you can move to relocate that moon and to take the 12th house completely away from your moon where they are no longer coupled in any sort of way, shape, or form. And so it doesn't replace your birth chart, but it does shift the energy. So you have a different experience or a different energy that you're engaging with when you're in that location. It basically describes your experience in that location. So yes and no, basically. It's not problematic unless the moon rules your 12th house in your relocated chart and it's on your midheaven, like moon MC line. But even then, it's not necessarily problematic. Like, what's your moon doing? And why are you scared of your 12th house so much? Maybe your career or profession involves 12th house topics and themes. Maybe you're a psychic or a medium. Maybe you are, opening a spiritual retreat center. Maybe you're someone who's deeply creative. Maybe you work for a prison. So I guess it kind of all runs on a spectrum. But yeah, it should decouple it. If you're moving far enough, it should decouple the moon from your 12th house, at least in the relocated chart. Okay, so we're getting into, okay, so I answered that one already. Jen, keep posting some in the chat. We're going to go on to the more professional, like practice questions now, because we have quite a lot of those. And then we can circle back to some of the other more general questions that we have here in the chat or in the Q&A in just a second. So put as many of them in the Slack channel for me as possible, Jen. So Elise wants to know, how can astrologers provide meaningful guidance for clients who feel stuck in recurring patterns beyond simply describing the astrology? For example, with a Scorpio rising client whose Jupiter is the second house ruler, is in conjunct retrograde Saturn at 29 Taurus, how would you help her work with this and feel more hopeful instead of just confirming the struggle? So I'm not entirely, I actually remember reading the full one on this because I made it more concise. So this person was having struggles financially. Jupiter is in conjunction with Saturn, and Jupiter is the second house ruler. So this gives me enough information to kind of give an example here. So when you're working with clients, you always want to give solutions. You don't want to just focus on the problems. You want to help them become aware or cultivate awareness around their patterns and problems. But inconjunctions always indicate a specific psychological pattern. With Jupiter and Saturn both in retrograde and Jupiter being the second house ruler, I would venture to guess that this person does not have very good boundaries around money, both personal boundaries involving budgeting and spending, but also boundaries with others. And so this is about recognizing this need to be overly generous and overly responsible for other people's stuff. Saturn in conjunction can indicate carrying too much responsibility for other people's problems and not enough responsibility for your own because you've burdened yourself with all this other stuff. So I would actually want to know what Saturn is connected to in the chart in terms of what house it rules, because that'll show what she's burdening herself with, and also where Jupiter and Saturn is in her chart, because that will also show what she's burdening herself with. It might not be that she's carrying other people's financial burdens, but it could be that she's so overwhelmed with responsibility in these other areas and boundary issues in these other areas that she doesn't have the energy to create the right structure and the right boundaries and be responsible with her finances. So the way that you'd help her work with this is that this is something that's completely up to her. Like, this is something that she has complete control over. It's not something happening to her with an in conjunction. It's always a psychological pattern that she needs to work on breaking. And so put the responsibility back on your client. You're not here to fix them. That's first and foremost. They can take the information that you give to them and they can utilize it to better their own lives. But also, that's kind of empowering, right? Like, it's not that you're doomed and that the money situation is doomed. It's that you're not recognizing kind of what you're doing and these patterns here and how to change it. And so you can help with that quite a lot too. Okay. And then Kirsten wants to know, how do you manage fear or anxiety when reading difficult placements in the chart of loved ones, especially children? That is a good question. So it's pretty natural if you see something that comes up that could have a negative association, that could bring challenge, that could bring something difficult, to sort of catastrophize it when it involves like a family member or a loved one. My best advice, if you are an astrologer, Kirsten, is to go back and look at what happened in the past when similar patterns came around. So if you have a difficult placement, so if you're looking at a transit, for example, and last time you had a Saturn transit, around this place, or Mars came around or something like that, what happened? Was it the worst case scenario? How likely is that to occur again? That type of thing can be helpful. But also, you just have to realize that we're never going to be right 100% of the time. So you might be wrong thinking it's the worst case scenario. And it's usually not the worst case scenario. So if you've been practicing for quite a while and working with a lot of clients, your clients often come to you thinking that, like, the worst possible thing is going to happen. And when you look at the chart, you're like, yeah, maybe, but it could possibly be all of these other things because it runs on a spectrum. And if you see something that's difficult, you can also get ahead of it. You can work with it instead of struggling against it. You can tackle it head on. You can make it easier for you. So, or for your children, right? If you see like a natal placement with your children that you're having anxiety around, what does that natal placement mean? What is the worst case scenario? How likely is that to even happen? And what can you do right now with your child, for your child? What can you teach your child to help them to better work with that energy so that worst case scenario never actually manifests? I especially love that with children, because children have all this potential that hasn't manifested yet. And it can manifest in a whole spectrum of ways. And so you get to help them work through that and manifest it more positively. It doesn't have to be the worst case scenario if it hasn't come up yet. And even if it's starting to come up, you can still shift it in a different direction. And even if it's an adult, you can still shift it in a different direction. So there's power in knowing, and there's power in the fact that you can see the solutions oftentimes in the challenging aspects in the chart that show the problems. And so that's something that we teach in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology. I also have a workshop on that too. All right, let's see. So what astrology software programs do you use or recommend for students? Michelle wants to know. So in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology, we just use the free software via astro.com. It's still one of my favorites. And so it does everything you need. It does not need to be fancy. You don't need to buy software. If you want to, I personally use Astro Gold because I am a Mac user and I don't want to have a PC to use Solar Fire. And Astro Gold does everything I could possibly need it to do. It doesn't hinder me in any way, shape, or form. It's very comprehensive. You do have to download the actual computer software, not the app on your iPhone or on your iPad. It has to be the software on the computer. It's very different. the app is very limited, whereas the software is more expensive and more comprehensive. I like it because you can actually like push the button to just move forward instead of having to go back and forth and do it in a more clunky way. Like on astro.com, it has all these different like reports and sheets and different things that are just all integrated there. So I don't have to click away and go to different places. That's the kind of the biggest benefit. I also like the way that it lists the different transits and progressions and things like that. I like that it has a sheet for basically everything. Like you can go down there and it'll show you all the different sun sign wheels, which is helpful for doing astrology forecasts. It shows zodiacal releasing. It shows, your perfections and all of that. It just shows everything. So you have different settings for that. So I like that quite a lot. That's my personal preference. I am not being paid by AstroGold to say this. It's just what I use. Um, how do you interpret big contradiction? Okay, so I don't use composite charts, Alexandra, so I'm so sorry. I can't answer that question. Do we have any additional questions, Jen, that I haven't covered in this little part here? Let's see. Most recent, most upvotes. Any help or suggestions when parenting a teen that has two mutable grand crosses? I am not a parent. I'm not really one to give parenting advice. It depends though. So like with mutable grand crosses, this is somebody who needs to have a certain level of flexibility. It depends on what planets are in the Grand Cross, but there can be like this energy here of rigidity and needing to be more flexible. Sometimes fear gets in the way of needing to change things or being able to change things and be flexible with people who have these mutable grand crosses because of that mutable energy. That mutable energy is about flexibility. I would also say support their respiratory system, support their lymphatic system, support their nervous system if it is a mutable grand cross, because in medical astrology, the mutable signs rule all of those things. And so doing things to support those systems will definitely boost their health moving forward and into adulthood. So that is something that you can always look at too. Not letting fear get in the way of, or helping them to overcome fear of change, or areas where they get stuck and become inflexible, where they clearly need to be flexible, which will be shown by the house placement of those mutable grand crosses. What in the chart can show neurodivergence? A lot of things. A lot of things can show neurodivergence, Lana. Um, it depends what type of neurodivergence, because ADHD in medical astrology looks different, although there's overlap with autism, which is different than having a sensory processing disorder, which is different than other types of neurodivergence. So it's not like blanket, there's like one thing in the chart that shows just general neurodivergence. Every specific diagnosis has its own combination of patterns. And so that's how we look at it in medical astrology. So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that without getting into like specifics. Um, okay. How would a lunar eclipse affect a person whose birthday is on the same day? So we touched on this, Maria, talking about the fact that I'm going to have a lunar eclipse on my birthday this year. Happy birthday to me. um, but it would affect that person by, so this is like, it is a culmination, but it's also a major transition point. So the new moon eclipses, which are the solar eclipses, are going to be a big reset where everything old is just being torn away and everything new is coming to fruition. The full moon eclipses are more of a culmination and a transition. A lot of really faded karmic circumstances in your life are going to be coming to a head and manifesting in a way that is going to change your life. It is going to take it on a brand new trajectory. Things are going to shift for you, but it's less about a reset where everything old gets pulled away, and it's more about that newness. Also, it depends if it's a north or south node eclipse. I talk about this very in depth in my Karmic Power of Eclipses workshop, which is going to be on sale 50% off for the eclipse season beginning September 1st. So keep an eye out for that, because we talk about how different types of eclipses affect people differently. All eclipses are not created equal. You also have your own pre and postnatal eclipses. Some people are born on eclipses, so the eclipses affect them differently. So it's really, yeah, it really runs on a spectrum here. Okay. Let's see. Are there any astrological placements that indicate a person's potential as a great astrologer? For Mars, it's not. Not necessarily. I've seen great astrologers with all sorts of different astrology. If you have a passion for astrology and an affinity for it and you love it, you can be a great astrologer. A great astrologer is someone who has the self-discipline to learn, who has the courage to actually practice and get it wrong a lot of times before you get it right. A good astrologer is somebody who has discernment and who is easily able to figure out how to transmit information in a way that other people understand, but also can utilize, who knows how to kind of be gentle with delivering the difficult stuff, and realistic with delivering the more, grandiose stuff that could be really exciting. But there's not a specific placement. I mean, there are some that I see commonly. So I know traditionally there's like Jupiter in the eighth house because the eighth house is occult studies and occult sciences. I have that placement. I don't think that's why I'm a great astrologer, but there's something there, right? A lot of Virgo placements, and I think there's a couple in Leo too, but there are a lot of fixed stars connected to astrology in the constellation of Leo, but definitely in the zodiac sign, like the tropical zodiac sign of Virgo. And so you'll sometimes see a lot of that too. But there's so many different, like a lot of Aquarius people, like there's so many different things. You don't have to have a certain placement. All of you can be great astrologers, doesn't matter. All right, cool. So I am going to truck along here. I really want to share with you a little overview of the Cosmic Academy of Astrology. If you're somebody who's thinking about enrolling and you're, just kind of wondering what we're doing, what it's all about, I'm going to walk you through it, because right now, as I mentioned a couple of times, we are doing our biggest sale on the Academy for the entire year. If you enroll in any of the 6 individual levels, you're going to get 35% off your enrollment, and you're still going to get a year of support and lifetime support in the student community. If you enroll for the full Academy and bundle all 6 levels, you always save money doing that. But right now you're going to save up to 62%, which is huge. And this ends Friday, August 29th, tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So time is kind of running out for that, and I just want to make sure that you get the information. But basically in the Academy, you get, at this point, I think it's like over 140 hours of just lessons. There's homework assignments that help you to actively practice the material and layer the information and integrate it each step of the way. We do monthly live study group sessions with our teaching assistants to go over more specific topics so you can practice your interpretations and get feedback from them in real time. We do twice monthly live Q&A calls for all the levels where you get to ask your questions and get answers in real time. And you actually get to be on screen with the teachers too and interact and engage with your fellow students. And you get 2 years of access to that, lifetime access to the student community, which is where you can ask all of your questions. You can practice your interpretations with your fellow students. That is all included. But the main thing, obviously, is the course itself and what you're going to be learning there. So I'm going to show that to you now. So welcome to the Cosmic Academy of Astrology. This is the back end of the course. At the beginning here, we do have like the schedule of events and live things. Level 1 is our natal chart interpretation level. So that's going to take you all the way from learning about the planet signs and houses. We have specific modules and lessons on how to synthesize what you've learned and put it all together. We get really in depth into planetary aspects. We have 2 different modules on that because you really need help synthesizing that. Most people do. That's the biggest place where most students get stuck. And so we get really detailed about that and give lots of explanations and examples and help you to look at it and frame it in a different way, kind of how we did on this call when we talked about squares and oppositions and the way that cardinal, fixed, and mutable really play into the interpretations there. We even do an intro to house rulerships because you need to know at least a little bit of house rulerships before we get into transits. And every single one of these has lots and lots of stuff going on here. So for example, with the lunar nodes, we have a lesson on the lunar nodes, we have a write-up on the lunar nodes, then we have our homework assignment and our multiple choice quiz to test your interpretive skills. The homework assignments are basically you just remembering like what you learned, but also putting it together to actually form interpretations. And then we actually have a lot of demonstrations about how to put it together in each of these. So I look at a lot of different charts here. So you get to see the astrology in action. Level 2 is our level on transits. We break this up into inner and outer planet transits. We also look at all of the like lunar nodes, the eclipses, there's a whole section on that. And it's basically formatted in the same way. We have research assignments that help you go back and understand transits through your own direct personal experience. Our teaching assistants can help work through that with you as well. And we do have study group sessions on level 2 and on transits. So you can kind of do it in action and in real time or play along at home with the replay and do your interpretations that way. You can also submit your interpretations in the student community and get feedback from expert astrologers every step of the way. Live Q&A calls, all that. The next one is house rulership. So this really needs to be its own level, right? Because as I mentioned before, house rulerships give you that freaky accurate interpretation, that nuance that you need in order to really be able to put it all together. And so we have everything. We have a whole module on the house ruler. We talk to you about how to determine planetary condition of the ruler so you can know if that house is problematic or not. We look at it holistically. We have entire modules on career and relationship interpretations because those are going to be the most common. And we also get into combining transits with house rulerships to get way more detailed in your interpretations. And so, so an example of this is going to be like all these different lessons here. And everyone has a download. Oh, and you get a 385-page student workbook. You get a digital copy for free, or you can actually get the paperback, which is pretty big. We do it at cost. So the paperback you can get for, I think it's like $29. We make no money on it with the printing and the shipping and all of that. So I think maybe it's $25, but yeah, so you can have all of that too. And then in level 4, that's where you get into yearly and monthly predictions. We talk about the solar return story, and really get deep into how to put that all together to see the biggest themes and the biggest energies that are coming up for your year ahead. We combine that with lunar returns to do monthly predictions so you can see the bird's eye view and then go in with the transits and get specific. Same thing with annual perfections. We integrate annual perfections with solar returns and lunar returns and transits. So that way you can figure out what are going to be the most predominant themes and the planet that you really need to focus on the most in your solar return reading and in your transit readings. And we are adding monthly perfections. I think this month I'm going to have that ready for you to watch. So we're actually adding a lot to the Academy this year. We're still working through it. We added a whole bonus module that is advanced chart interpretation techniques in level 1 already, and we're still working through a lot of those. And we're adding a lot to house rulerships. We're adding the monthly perfections, and then we're adding a whole course on secondary progressions. Right now, when you join, you instantly get the progressed moon in the birth chart. So that's going to be already in there. So you get a whole lesson on the progressed moon, and then we're going to be adding all the different progressions. And then level 6 is the thing that kind of sets the Academy apart from a lot of other courses, is that we don't just show you all this and then just say, good luck. We work in like how to actually give professional readings. We do ethical considerations and professional ethics in astrology, which is really important to me because a lot of astrologers do some really messed up stuff, especially out in the, TikTok world. And I want you guys to be equipped to help people because I know that's what you want. My background is in clinical psychology. I do have a master's degree and in counseling. So I talk about counseling skills and how they apply to astrology. We talk a lot about how to structure a reading, how to kind of guide the conversation, how to deliver challenging information, boundaries with difficult clients. We really prepare you for all of that. And then we get into a lot of professional reading demonstrations so you can see how this all works from multiple astrologers doing it in different ways. And then we get into astrology business. So we do astrology business, like how to actually set up your business, offer creation, and set up building your email list. We have like a whole bunch of stuff that's coming up for that too. We talk about like opt-ins, and we talk about like email marketing strategy for beginners. We talk about how to actually set up your sales page and your online booking system. We're going to have like a whole tech stack for that coming up. We're still working through the last couple lessons on that. We talk about social media content and even YouTube content. I even include my astrological forecasting mini course. You can learn how to make forecasts like I do that get tens of thousands of views each time I post them. And at the end, you also get the opportunity to apply for a certificate of completion. For that, you have to just do a couple of practice readings and complete a written final exam full of interpretations. And then you can go to the student community. This is where you're going to hang out with all of us. And let's see, which one's the academy? This one right here. So this is where you can ask your questions and get answers from our teaching assistants. And usually we have like a 24 to 48 hour turnaround. People also go here to post their homework assignments to get feedback on that, so you can make sure your interpretations are correct. We also have like a breakthroughs and aha moments where people share things that they figured out that they're so excited about. And we have a study buddies section where people connect with other astrology students to practice and learn and grow together. And then we have a whole practice section where you can post your chart and do chart readings for other people in here. So you get to interact with everyone on top of the Q&A calls and the study group sessions, which are all recorded. And as I mentioned before, this is all included when you get all 6 levels. Right now, it's up to 62% off when you bundle all of it, or you can just pick a level. You'll still get the community. You'll still get a year of study group sessions and Q&A calls. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Do you guys have any questions about the Academy before we sign off here? That's not the most recent. Oh, the most recent are going to be at the bottom. I do not do personal readings at all, Lena. Not right now, at least. Quintella wants to know, do you still receive the 2 monthly Q&A calls for 2 years when you opt for either the 12 or 18-month payment plans? Yes. So you do get the calls for 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, if you still want more calls, we have a low-cost option for you to just continue getting the calls month to month until you don't want them anymore. If you feel like you need more than 2 years of Q&A calls, which most people complete the course in a year. So we're giving you above and beyond to make sure you have plenty of time to go back, revisit, ask questions, even after you're out there practicing professionally, if you keep pace. And because it's self-paced, we do offer like these example timelines where you can finish either in 9 months, 12 months, or 2 years if you follow along with that kind of timeline that we give you. And the replay, Ali, will be emailed to you later tonight, so don't worry about that. Let's see. Do we have any additional questions about this before we sign off? Thank you so much. Yes, the study group sessions can be extended. I'm so excited to see some of you in the Cosmic Academy of Astrology. It was really nice to connect with some of you here, even though the chat didn't work. You guys are chatting in the Q&A, so That worked out, I guess. I apologize for that little mix up. I don't usually use Zoom for these calls. I use another platform, but this just seemed easier. But yeah, yay. Thank you guys so much. I hope to see you in class. If I skipped your question, we're going to kind of go back through and download them, and I hopefully will send